By activity. Okay, this is working now. This is working now.
So did you even try to have a meeting?
Um, I was gonna boost Harrisburg around the time, but then there was also just a quorum issue. I got the norovirus, so I was not. Tim was gonna chair, but he didn't.
So we need that Tuesday.
Hi, Adnan.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Wow, you're in such a beautiful location.
I try.
Well, I think we have quorum. I think Judith was going to be here. For her, we'll just get started. Yeah. If you submit the address first, you would. Yeah. Oh, let me see if Judith's coming. We have a lot we're voting on tonight.
What would be a Brown Act violation to have a discussion with 4 people if it was a quorum, even if one of them? Right. I mean, you could meet with a less than a quorum. So you could meet, you just not an official meeting. Right. No, but you could get stuff done. All right.
Okay, fantastic. Judy Murphy's on her way. So, Adnan, it looks like I made the mistake of not submitting your remote address. I apologize for that. I don't think we're going to. Only thing I know we're going to vote on tonight is minutes. So, what I see is that if we voted on something, Adnan would be able to vote. Okay. So would you be okay to still participate in our discussion, even if you can't vote on the minutes or something else that might come up?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, the hybrid.
you got a mic.
Yeah. Well, last time we had Mary sit at the Giants with us, just so that she was, because I've tried to listen to some meeting recordings and the council liaison sits there and you can't hear anything. Yeah, maybe a little too stealth if you're. Sure. Annie, what are you taking pictures of?
Good question. I just got a new lens. In fact, to decide what I want to take a picture of with it, but it's probably good for nightscapes. It's an f2.8 28mm cast and wide. Landscapes and nightscapes.
I've seen some of your nightscape photography.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Not that kind. I've done, well, the nightscapes are on the gamut. Most of them involve oak trees and some stuff. With Full Valley and
You have
oak
some,
trees. I could
have
probably
some awesome oak trees.
show you. Yeah. They make for really ominous looking silhouettes. Yeah. Yeah, so
That kind of stay away from Facebook, it creep me out. A little bit too much data gathering.
yeah. All I do is post pictures. I seldom ever even say.
Yeah.
Lex says unknown in
Adnan, we're just waiting for Judy Murphy to actually show up in person to create a plan.
Thank you.
Kirsten, do you know John? Do you know John?
Of course I like John.
Of course you know John. So is the Zoom etiquette, Craig, that if I'm on the larger Zoom room, I should sign off individually?
Oh, no, no. The important thing is just make sure you've muted, that you've got everything muted. Otherwise, you're going to get a really horrible. Yeah, but other than that, I find when I'm on council, I tend to log in just so I can see, like, particularly if you want to see if there's members of the public that want to raise their hand, somebody's got to be looking at the Zoom room to look and see who's participated. Right. So yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure it's muted. What are you taking?
Consistent with them.
Sure. This guy was picking up.
No, this one.
Oh, this one, got it, yeah, these are those.
These are taking the this tap. That's the green color. So turn again.
Judith Murphy. Hello, welcome. Oh, no problem. Yeah, we gotta change that somewhere. So, because I made the mistake of qualifying for but he's gonna
His remote location
Lots and
looks
lots
pretty
of
good.
I know.
Although I think it's fake. man.
Real somewhere.
Oh, it's
That's
real,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, great, we have. So do a roll call. Let's maybe do an icebreaker with our roll call. If folks just want to share something that you've seen recently that has impacted you. I'll start listening here, and on my way here, I saw some wild Douglas irises popping up. Judith Murphy?
Hi, Judith Murphy. I'm present. The scene house is just doing fabulous. Kirsten Kingdom. I'm sure I've seen something beautiful lately, but I just think it's
I'll qualify. Andrew Pierce.
Andrew Pierce. The other day I saw at the combined Easter Passover experience at my house what's called an Africomen. It's a matzah in the shape of cotton, including
Adnan, would you care to share also?
Sure. I'm President Adnan Iftikhar. I am in Joshua Tree right now, so witnessing some super bloom, which has been absolutely gorgeous, and some oases down in the southern part of the park. And yeah, glad to be here.
Would a committee member volunteer to read the land account?
The town of Portola Valley acknowledges the colonial history of this land we dwell on, the unceded territory of the Ramaytush, Ohlone, Kamian Nation, and Mwema Ohlone, who endured a human and cultural genocide that included removal from their lands and their sacred relationship to the land. Portola Valley recognizes that we profit from the commodification of land seized from indigenous peoples and now bear the ecological consequences. We seek to understand the impact of these legacies on all beings and to find ways to make repair.
And item number 3, right? Approval of minutes from February 14th. Make sure you've looked at them. Corrections that we need to make.
I move that we approve them as written.
Second.
Second.
Roll call vote with just the who votes to approve the minutes as noted? Vote aye. Then you have it. Approved as recorded. Thank you.
Before we leave this item, can I say thank you? It was great minutes. They strike a perfect balance between what we did, what we said. Thank you, Jennifer. what we did, and nothing was said, so we had to understand. Really gone for 9 pages and had everything everybody ever said. And so, thank you.
On to new business. Bread and butter. We discussed individual and committee priority strategy for this year. So,
Can I make just one point of order? Are you checking to see if there's any members of the public? If you should ask for oral communications. You got John here. I'm not sure what he's here to discuss.
okay.
And then on each of these agenda items, technically, you're supposed to ask for public comment.
Right, thank you. On these agenda items that the department. Adnan, I suppose I could include you. You can chime in whenever. I want to welcome Cole also. Hi, Cole. Cole is our student liaison.
Hi.
Hi there. John, anything you want to chime in? Okay. Thank you.
One quick thing I do want to say, it is really hard to hear you, Lucy. I don't know why.
Okay. Let me move this closer. Oh, yeah, that's it. That's different.
Much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan.
Basically, everybody needs to sit with this right at their mouth. I've
Yeah,
been
thank
watching
you.
committees from home, and it's you miss half of what's going on.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, new business. Discuss individual and committee priorities and strategy for 2023. Yeah, so I feel like we've had a hibernation period. And then our one meeting that we have had in this calendar year was sort of dominated by discussion of the land acknowledgement situation. So this is an opportunity for us to individually share what we're interested in working on via this committee, whether we want to break into subcommittee organization, set overall committee goals. I appreciate this, the strategy of committee members just finding a project that they feel excited about or have a level of passion that would motivate deliverables. So I think that's the approach for us to take now. Yeah, I was reflecting in our time in between upon just our committee and what our committee is doing, and if it's a funny format for doing this kind of work within the town. And that reflection left me feeling encouraged that I think this committee is important, and that there's a lot of access points by having this committee structure to allow us to look at policy, to look at official things like the seal or the land acknowledgement if we want to access town communications, town funds. So I think there's a lot of really positives for us doing this work as a committee. Does anyone, so I want to open the conversation first, if anybody just has any kernels of wisdom and input about like coming from last year into this year, how it would make sense to organize our work. Does that make sense as a question? Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
First of all, committees become a little bit kind of difficult to have meetings, and go through if you don't have a meeting, and so forth. So I was thinking an ideal size of a committee for our small group would be like 2. If we could just talk on the phone, and that's a committee meeting, it's not bringing issue. And so if I was going to be on any committees, be newly formed, that might be the size that, because then the 2 people can kind of push each other. Logistics, right? The other thought I had is you were raising the issue of, yeah, I did sit on a similar type committee for Santa Clara County and chaired it for 3 terms. also Palo Alto also chaired it for you. What we would get involved with would be law enforcement issues, racial issues, and gender issues, and gay issues that arose in town, county. And if there were incidents, you tend not to have a lot of incidents. Small. Allocation of funds, housing issues. On or something. And let me think what the other issues that came up were. Educational things, seminars, presentations. So those are, because we're a government body, that's sort of what we can do. And we have access to the town council, we have access to staff. If we ask them a question, they probably answer it. If we give them some suggestions, they might listen, they might not. That seems to be where we are, as opposed to just a discussion group or a topic. Those are not what we have.
Thank you, Andrew.
So I'll chime in. Thinking about the last year, I think it's important that we not be a discussion group. As Andy says, that most of us are busy and rather action oriented. And I feel like the first year was sort of figuring things out, getting ourselves together, and hopefully then being able to move forward a little bit. The issues that I care the most about are law enforcement issues. I think it was George Floyd that was the ignition point for a lot of this. And it's true that in Portola Valley, we don't have much in the way of those issues, being very lucky and privileged. But we live in a county where there are some issues like that. And we certainly live in a world where there are issues like that. And we can have, the idea that everything starts locally and moves out. You can hold yourself sort of ideologically, if you will, responsible, but trying to act locally. So I would like to keep at least a toe in what's going on county-wise with making sure that equity is part of how things are operating. I was very interested in housing. I think that we have some responsibility to try to move in the direction of making the community more inclusive. I spent some time on that last year. I did not, I think some pieces of what we were thinking about are almost impossible. It's not really within our ability to increase the number of people of color in town. We just can't, as a committee, make that happen. And there's a danger in sort of objectifying folks as you try to work on things like that. I think the answer after 6 or 8 months of working on that was all we can do is work harder on being a welcoming community so that anybody who might be interested in being here would feel welcome to come here. But I think there have also been some responsive parts to that too. The working on the housing element, I think equity has been a significant piece of what stayed in play as a housing element got talked about. And then the fund, the dealing with the funds that we were sought out to express our opinion about what should happen with that fund is important. I think those are sort of where my area, my areas of interest lie. And I think that primarily we shouldn't just be sort of a feel-good look, our town has a race and equity committee, aren't we progressive and advanced? I think we bear some actual responsibility in trying to keep our own house in order, to stay, that if we're going to be a committee to sort of, this is too strong a word, but push hard to have ourselves involved in things that are going on in town that have any kind of a potential equity twist, all the way from hiring down to policy sorts of things. And that, I have some comments about us all being just well-meaning white people sitting here talking about an issue that
not right.
I know, but mostly
sitting at this dais, yes.
Sitting here now. I would love to see that change. I would happily give up my seat to somebody more representative to be here. I consider myself a placeholder until that can happen. Those are my main thoughts.
Thanks, Judith. So are you interested in continuing to work on the housing piece? Would you say?
Yeah, I think it's important. I got, well, we can talk about when we talk about housing later. I think broader discussion.
Well, as the newest member of the committee, I'm still sort of feeling my way. And even though I've technically been on since, I don't know, August or September, it doesn't seem like it's been very long. I moved here from Washington, D.C. And so it came as, I mean, I love living in Portola Valley. I live at the Sequoias. It's, I love hiking. I love walking around. But I must say that I find myself thinking, as I see neighborhood watch signs, for instance, I find myself thinking about how I, as an older white woman, not very threatening to anyone, and unlikely to have anyone called a neighborhood watch on me. If it were my young grandson who happened to be Black and have long hair, that probably wouldn't be true. And I think that's a very tricky issue because obviously people are concerned about the security of their neighborhood. And yet so often that can be a shield for being inhospitable to anyone who looks different than the majority of them. So that's an issue I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned about what's happening around the country as far as the schools are concerned. And we don't have any direct responsibility for that, but I have a gay son, lesbian daughter, non-binary grandkid. So that's an area in which I have some expertise and interest. And I'm also aware of the fact that it is nationally, I'm not sure about Portola Valley, nationally, it's a very touchy issue. So those are sort of my, and also as a lawyer, I am interested in sort of the legal framework. And the sheriff, for instance, providing our police enforcement, being aware of our commitment to being fair, equitable in the way that we deal with residents and people who come into the community.
Yeah. It might need to be turned on.
John Silver. I just wanted to say that I think I'm glad to hear all of you say what you did. It sounds like good ideas. And I'm going to differ with Andrew on one thing. The committee should never be just two people. And especially if it's a public meeting, you can't just meet on the phone. I think, we all.
He meant subcommittee. He was talking about subcommittee.
Oh, I misunderstood. I was going to say, okay. I retract my comments. Thank you for clarifying. I missed that detail. No, subcommittees are fine, especially if they report back to the full committee and it's public. Yeah. Subcommittees of 2 or 3 people can make a lot of sense. Just very briefly, my application may be discussed a little later, but having gone to schools here, just following up on what's taught in our schools, I'm sure it's better now. I hope it's better now. But in 4th grade California history, the history of genocide was glossed over. In 5th grade and 8th grade U.S. history, we were taught the lost cause history of Reconstruction and Jim Crow. Shameful. In college or in high school, I learned more of the truth about Reconstruction and the repression of Black people. At college too. I hope that has changed now. I'd love to look at the textbooks that were given to me as a kid in the schools. I reached out to the superintendent. They don't have an archive, but I may read some of the old board minutes, but I I contact a friend who's an historian, and I'd love to find, maybe they're just in the Library of Congress, but I would love to look at the books I was taught BS from as a kid. My 8th grade teacher in US history here, in the wing that's no longer standing, wanted us to do photo collages of typical Americans. And we were given Life and Look magazines. A lot of ads with cigarettes and Leave It to Beaver type families were cut out. I put James Meredith's shot full of buckshot on the side of a highway in Mississippi in mine. She's, that's not a typical American. It's typical what happens to Black people who stand up for their rights. She disqualified my project. I put it on the front of my US history binder, so she had to see it on the top of my head every GD goddamn day. And, you know, that was the education I had. Now, I learned something from that kind of abuse. It was very educational. You learn, if you've got a strong family background and you aren't cowed, you learn from your passion. So I'm grateful for having learned, seen that firsthand, but we should find out what's happening today. And I'd love to document it.
Thank you, John. Adnan, would you like to share anything about just how you think, any thoughts about how our committee approaches work this year?
Yeah, I just in reviewing the duties and function of our committee as in the documentation, it's to review existing and proposed town policies, regulations, and practices, and propose changes to the town council about those policies, not to the town council itself, but I think that might need to be reworded because it sounds, anyways, I think that collaborating with and making recommendations to town committees, commissions, staff, and other affiliated groups. The reason I'm reading this is I'm going back to the discussion we had last year, last time we met. It seems like last year, it was a couple of months ago now, around the land acknowledgement and the consequences of the different ways that some of the committees have reacted to the way that was that came about, and or in the way that it was communicated to them, and a variety of other feelings that folks have around that. I do think that having those hard conversations is part of the reason that I am in this committee, and I think that continuing to have some of those harder conversations is important. I also do think that change is necessary. Especially, I remember somebody, I recall somebody mentioning something around employment practices. I do think that that's important to look at as well, as we are currently hiring, in the process of hiring for folks in town. So I think there's a lot to think about. I do think that if we cast a net too wide, it may dilute what we were trying to do, or at least what the charter is. So I do think that reviewing those duties and functions, and either adding or refining them would be a great place to start. For me, the impact of historic laws is very important. Truth and reconciliation is important as well in terms of the Ohlone peoples in the town of Portola Valley, and also looking at the practices that we have in our town. I do also want to think about the impact that we can have and what we can do to make change happen, and meaningful change too. So that being said, I I do think that there was some good work that happened with the housing subcommittee last year. I think we made some good recommendations. I'm not sure where those are in process, but I would love to continue doing some of that work as well.
Thank you.
Can I just interject something that might be a good opportunity to ask? new council member, we did that in the fall. We were asked to make recommendations about how on the housing fund that's accumulated from the sale of the Blue Oaks property, etc. I'm forgetting its total exactly proper name.
Policy for the inclusionary.
Right, inclusionary. And we submitted that last fall. So the old council saw it, but there's been some discussion more recently about that. And there's been things about, well, let's look at this in terms of this and that, but I'm not sure that piece has gotten carried forward into the new discussions. Have you seen our recommendations at all? So I'm not sure how to make sure it gets on the table when it's being looked at again.
Yeah, well, there's, as part of the post-housing adoption, there's one of the pieces is to come up with a policy for the inclusionary housing fund. And that seems to me a pretty appropriate place to have that discussion.
Well, so, but what I'm saying is that it all looks like it's appropriate, just that I think we appropriately put in a list of recommendations, and it was sort of, that was last year and this is this year, and I'm not sure it's continued to move along in the process so that the new people are actually seeing it and including it.
Right. So, I mean, either keep track of the council agenda so we make sure that we know what's coming up. We can talk to the mayor. We can also talk to Corey, who's the assistant town manager, and remind her that when that item comes up, it's important that we include that information.
Okay, so would it be a good thing for you to do that, to send
Yeah,
it out to Corey and say hi?
Yeah, sure, absolutely that.
Find a
and
copy
make sure,
of it and
yeah.
send it and say.
Well, make sure she knows about it, but then I would also encourage you to watch the process, because I mean, you throw something in and then, 6 months later it comes up and nobody's thinking about it and it gets lost, you're going to feel bad, and they're not going to have said, oh yeah, we didn't want to do this. They just would have not remembered. So, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I take your point. So that's what I'm saying. I think it needs to be a little of both, which is introduce yourself, make sure she knows about it. And then I would recommend that you watch this sort of process and then remind people when we get closer to it that, we need to do something. So.
Great. Cole, is there anything you want to add, Cole? No pressure. About what you would be interested in working on this year as part of this community?
I mean, I'm like pretty open to like working on a lot of different things. I mean, I feel like a lot of this sounds really interesting. So I feel like, yeah, I guess like wherever like there's not that many people, I'm happy to help out, because I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty open to working on anything this year.
Okay, thanks.
So if I could just add one thing to the listening to the conversation, one thing you guys could do that'd be incredibly valuable is, in a sense, to bring back to the community. Like if you go out into the county, it's sort of outreach into the county. There's a bunch of different committees and groups that meet in the county, and bring that information back so that at least people here have some at least passing knowledge of that information. Because there's no way, I mean, I'm on the council now, and I'm already on like 15, committees outside of here, and there's just no way the council members can possibly, sit on all possible commissions, nonprofits that have things to say. There's a ton of information. So I think if you guys could get into some of that information flow, and maybe different members of the committee might go to some of these. Like, I mean, I get things, that I'm a council member on, a low income housing seminar for blah, 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 right? And I don't have time to go to all these things. But I think, for some of these, it might be appropriate for you guys to go and say, hey, here's a summary of what happened in this meeting. So that might be another valuable piece if that's something you guys are interested in.
Some of those things that, are only open to sort of elected representatives. So that one, but the other part of the networking aspect of it occurs to me is that if you get notifications of things you can't possibly go to, you might just forward them to the chair, and she could distribute them to us. And then one of us could say, oh, that sounds interesting. And so obviously they wouldn't all get attended, but a few of them might, because we're not in, in some of the loops, but not. So in terms of specifics, after you've all talked specifics, I would like to be continue to be involved in anything that we do related to law enforcement. And I've tried to stay in touch with the sort of Fixing San Mateo people because they've been working with the sheriff and trying to get that that whole civilian oversight thing going, which I think is important. And I'd be willing to sort of be our liaison with that group and to work on housing in whatever way we can.
Okay, great. Committee Member Murphy, Law Enforcement and Housing. I personally, just in a learning from last year, the main thing I worked on was the town seal, and a lot of it was internal, just like Kim and I figuring out how to approach it. So I think something I learned from there is just I want this year to result in more of a deliverable, and actually, making changes and having a presence in the community. Because I think even having conversations that cause people to think, to me, is a valuable. So that's the one thing I'd like to see more of for myself this year. And I think I've heard from other committee members as well, just to kind of orient ourselves to more of a deliverable by the end of the year. I'd be interested in working on the land acknowledgement because it's something that is alive right now. And I think there's a lot of valuable conversation coming out of it. And there's going to be sort of some externality results that are actually really valuable that are coming out of that. And that ties in also to the town seal work, which to me, still feels really important. I feel stressed every time I see the town seal. So, and again, I think there's just a lot of valuable conversations to be had. And I've heard from a lot of folks that, the seal really does just bother them and feel violent. So that's what I'm interested in. So if we're getting into specifically into subcommittees now, talking about agenda item 4B, I guess I wanted to hear.
I was just going to follow up on your comment. One other thing I might suggest is that you guys come up with some options rather than here's a seal or here's a land acknowledgement. Like, come up with 3 of them and say, here is a range of things that we think make sense. Here's why we think this one's a better choice. But I think you'll get a better community discussion if it's a little broader range. There's one thing I felt like with the land acknowledgement was like, here it is, one land acknowledgement. And so people were sort of forced to split. It's either you're for it or you're against it, rather than having, I think what you're after is a more robust conversation around it. And I think if you had some options, then you could get people maybe to say, well, I like this one for these reasons, but I don't like this part of it. I like this one for, and you might get a more nuanced conversation. And you might, with the seal, you might get that same thing if you could come up with some different options.
Yeah,
get at that.
We're not going to just deliver a seal for the town council.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, so talking about, is there any public comment? We're going to call that. Do any committee members want to speak more specifically to what your interest would be for work this year? Like, Andrew, do you have a specific?
Number 1, adopting or recommending the adoption of state-of-the-art anti-discrimination policy. That's something I got passed through in Palo Alto. Since that time, at that time, transgender was so we included it, so I guess we're a little heavy. But and actually our county attorney, Chief Town 30, that would be one thing. Another thing would be on the law enforcement side, you have a contract, I assume, with the sheriff. It's renewed or but yeah, we could certainly put in there anything we want to recommend, whatever we thought was appropriate. And again, there are cities that have, original hometown that had, with cooperation with the CAU, came up with a policy avoiding excessive police stops. So, people but and ironically, the minority people that are stop are here today, the white people are here. That's something we might look at. I don't know why the town seal wouldn't just be the schoolhouse.
Okay. Great. Any other committee members want to share specifically of what they're interested in working on before we sort of talk about subcommittee organization? Any members of the public want to contribute anything? Okay. So on to 4A, review subcommittees and subcommittee roster. It's a ask for folks who have been on, town committees for a while. Like I feel like the bulk of the work is actually done in subcommittees because this is just a limited 90-minute meeting once a month, and the work that's actually going to happen in the community is through subcommittees. So I'm actually just literally wondering what is the role of this committee meeting interfacing with subcommittees? This is like, to what level do subcommittees need the permission of the larger committee for anything? Are we just acting, giving perspective back to subcommittees? Maybe that's just an obvious question.
Well, Andrew's the one who can answer what there's a legal aspect to all that about what subcommittees are supposed to do. The practice that I've seen in the years I've been doing it, that the committee is the responsible body. And the subcommittees are sort of serfs, the working, the mechanics of the whole thing. The committee's the limo that drives in to present to the council, and the subcommittees are the little motors that run it. And so the subcommittee gets appointed, and ideally not appointed to be, but people who want to work on that issue. And then in between meetings, they meet once, twice, 5 times, depends on their energy level and the urgency of the matter. And they bring it back. They come up with suggestions, etc. Sometimes they come up with a fairly finished product to bring back, and it's honed by the full committee. Or sometimes they bring back a range of options, and there's discussion over months by the full committee, and then the full committee makes the decision. In an ideal world, and I'm a fond of Quaker process, ideally you get it to the point where it's unanimous, because everybody agrees on the product and is happy with it, and then that gets acted on either in the community or presented to the council or whatever. But a subcommittee never has the ability to act independently in the community as the race and activity committee. I don't think you can delegate that down. The council gives that to us as a whole, and we're responsible. But it's just unwieldy. You can't get much done with all of us sitting in a public meeting or in public comment on, with every 5 paragraphs. You just can't do the work effectively.
I think the efficient way of getting stuff done is go out and listen. The other thing that we can do is share that stuff on the agenda. So the item agenda would be these 3 recommendations for them. Recommendation from an item. It requires a certain amount of time sensitivity to have you finished product. So that we can packet for the meeting. Public can see it. It's on the agenda. Doesn't mean it's been adopted. Doesn't mean we're doing it. It does mean there's out there or thoughts out there for everyone to react to. That's the most efficient way for community. Instead of reporting at the meeting, course, a week before the meeting,
Mm-hmm.
here, here's what we want to put in. That's it.
Appreciate it.
Okay, great. I appreciate your clarity as well. You all have a lot more experience than I do, and I appreciate you boiling it down like that. So a subcommittee should not be like going out and interacting with the town council independently. Okay, they can have conversations, and just not make action.
Express preference that the communications up to the council through the chair, so
Okay.
that every council member is not every member of every committee,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Just try to, give them some time to sleep at night.
Yeah.
And
If you had
because it's
some
more
hardcore,
efficient.
if you had some hardcore thing that you I don't see anything wrong with delegating to the person who's head of committee
Mhm.
to go meet the presentation.
Right.
Especially if there's like a level of.
Doesn't mean that only the
Mhm.
chair can speak to the council if there's a presentation on that topic. Often the subcommittee would do it, but in terms of, in the course of the month, it's been. But the same thing, if we're working on, the housing and something comes up on the subcommittee and we really need to know something from Laura, I think we would be expected to make sure we hone it. So we, talk to her 4 times, we talk to her once or twice, and get that back and then bring that to the committee.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that perspective, all of you. Craig, is there anything you'd like to add as a council member for that theory that I put out?
Yeah, so just playing off what Judith was just saying, I'd be a little careful about interacting with staff as a subcommittee. At a minimum, I guess I'd go, talk with the council liaison just so that we, keep the number of interruptions to staff to a reasonable number, which is not necessarily 0. But I don't think it's open season for anybody on any committee to say, oh, well, I just feel like talking to staff because I want to talk to staff. So I do think we need to temper it. And generally, I think people are pretty respectful of that, but that's one piece. So I think, before you go to staff, maybe talking with the chair and with the liaison just to say, hey, here are the things, we've kind of honed it down. We got this set of questions I think we need to get answered. And just sort of get that, yeah, this seems like a reasonable use of staff's time. Versus, we're going to talk about that, but maybe 6 months from now is when we're actually going to get to it. So it's using up staff time today doesn't really make that much sense, for instance. Right. So I think that's what, in terms of council, certainly when you're going to bring something up like a recommendation that you're going to bring to the full council, then that should come from the full committee, typically through the chair and the liaison. But you want that to come from your committee for sure. In terms of talking to council members, I mean, I don't have the other council members still, but if you guys want to call me up and talk about stuff, I'm happy to talk about these things. But I'm not necessarily going to carry it to the council unless the entire committee, meets and discusses what they think is kind of the right approach.
Okay. Great.
I guess maybe that's something I didn't say was that it varies a lot from committee to committee, how the liaisons are used. And I think it probably makes sense to use them more rather than less, especially in the communication.
Okay.
Yeah, when we get to, let's see, 4E, that in some sense, that's what I'm hoping as well, is that we get a stronger relationship with the liaison to basically, in some ways, to protect staff's time, but also just to make sure that, everything's sort of roughly in the right place and we're not getting wild in sort of, expectations and then just have them ignored, which is the worst thing, right? People put a lot of time and energy into it. If it's not going to make any headway, let's sort of early on kind of have that conversation.
Okay, great. So included in our agenda packet as a sort of rough approximation of what our subcommittees were at the end of last year. We have the housing subcommittee. It sounds like we want to keep going with that subcommittee. Correct? And Judith, you would be interested in that subcommittee. Andrew, since you were on the ad hoc housing element committee? Like, do you have interest in keeping on with that work, or did you kind of do your part there? Yeah.
I can't hear Andrew.
I went to a lot of meetings. I listened to a lot of stuff. And we made our recommendations, which I didn't agree with. The council apparently, and a little burned out.
That's fine.
You know, possibly say about it. However, it doesn't mean I wouldn't do something in the future, but not that interested in housing.
Okay, no problem. Adnan, you, I recall, were a part of this subcommittee. Are you still interested in working on that with Judith?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I forgot to mention, I didn't hear from Johnny, so I'm not sure about his attendance. But Kim fell ill, so that's why she's not here. So we'll have to find out where she'll fit in on subcommittees. Land acknowledgement has been Kim, and I've been working on it a lot now. So I think Kim and I are good to keep working on that together. Does anyone feel a particular desire to join us? No pressure. Going twice. Okay. Town seal, same kind of thing. Marinucci Neely.
I'd be interested in working on that, especially when you get to how we're presenting it to the community.
Mm-hmm. Great, we're going to be getting to that fast. Okay, you are welcome to join us. Adnan, we're not boxing you out there, are we?
No, all good.
Okay.
I do know that Cole had unmuted for a second.
Oh, cool. You want to share anything?
I mean, I'm not exactly sure, but that sounds pretty interesting to me. Maybe I could consider joining on. That would be cool.
The town seal.
Yeah.
All right, you're with us, and since you're not an official committee member, you don't bring a quorum. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other subcommittee I heard emerge was law enforcement. I don't know if that was an official subcommittee last year, but I think Judith and Andrew, I heard you both express interest in working on that. Is that accurate? Okay. Would that be a good descriptor for that subcommittee, law enforcement, or? You can call it whatever you want.
No, well, I'm just trying to think of it as a better law enforcement, public safety.
Okay.
That would include possibly the issues regarding.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've heard that as a sort of recurring theme throughout. You first brought it up, and yeah.
My wife would like the side, but my daughter would like the side.
Yeah. That's something I'd be interested in.
Now we have 8 members. What's the official membership?
We are currently at 7, and we have 2, I believe. I was trying to check in with Andy Brown to confirm his continued interest in, but I haven't been able to reach him. Yeah. Ah, there we go.
So we can have up to 3 on it.
Currently, yes. If we,
up to 3.
Yeah. So town policy is one that I'm wondering about. I mean, I think when the former council members originally, wanted to create this committee, that was a major area of focus that they were looking for, of like reviewing town policy for systemic barriers to inclusion and discrimination. And just wondering from committee members is, Andrew, you mentioned the anti-discrimination policy, so that would fall in that realm.
Yes.
Well, we've talked about this before, and in fact, number one on the list of our duties and functions was review existing and proposed policies, regulations, practices, etc.
Yes.
And to propose changes as is needed. And I thought that Andy had said that that was sort of his area of expertise and interest, and that and that he, you know, and same thing, you know, it's not really fair to make a subcommittee one and then dump all the workload on them, although you on.
I think Gwen was on that sorry, pardon me.
Yeah.
Gwen was on the subcommittee with you, and then she resigned, and then you were sort of consumed by the ad hoc.
I was one of a bunch of 6-hour meetings.
Right, exactly.
Twice a month.
Yeah.
You have a little more free time now that now that the housing element is.
Adnan, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so yeah, there's sort of two ways of looking at policy. One is two ways of looking at policy. One is sort of to look at what can we add to it to make it clearer. The other is to look at every little thing that comes along, stuff, and make sure. And that really comes to, you know, the example of that would be housing. We have both the housing element, which includes an element, certainly, that also the inclusionary housing fund is also. But there's other areas of things that the town does, hiring, contracting, use of facilities that also impact race and everything.
Yeah. Karen Batra, I remember, had brought up that people who are not residents of our town cannot rent our facilities.
Right.
Yeah, I had an experience this weekend with somebody feeling frustrated about that.
I think the Portola Valley equivalent of Foothills Park.
Well, it's interesting when the town center, when it first opened, it was open to non-residents too. It was just the fees were different. They had a different fee schedule. It was one fee for us and considerably more expensive. And some of it, my understanding was it just had to do with demand. That there was some, you know, really a lot of demand, and that all, you know, every weekend, every wedding was happening, and 80% it was non-resident. And I don't know.
I'd like to, sorry, call us to task on where we are with our conversation. Sorry, in terms of the reviewing of the committees, because I think this would be really valuable conversation in the subcommittee.
Excellent, thank you, Adnan. Adnan, you had mentioned an interest in policy. Would you like to join Andrew on that subcommittee, or
I would.
Okay. Great. I think you two would be a good team. What other subcommittee interests do you have, Adnan? One related to that question. There was this, I don't know what the name of it was, sort of a communication subcommittee that was
awareness and engagement.
Awareness and engagement. Thank you. And I do think that's a really important piece, just basically how we're communicating with the community. So wondering about anyone's interest in that. Adnan, you had previously been on that subcommittee. Do you want to continue with that, or tell me where
you know, I think my probably my limit would be 2, so I'd have to figure out which 2 I'd want to be on. And I'd love to have Kim on that in that conversation as well, because Kim and Pat were part of that subcommittee as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm hearing that you would like to work with Andrew on town policy, and then are in discernment about where you want to put your effort beyond that.
Correct.
Okay. Great. Kirsten, you joined us in Town Seal. Do you have any other interests in the subcommittees that have been named so far?
The law enforcement.
Great.
So you'd obviously be natural for awareness and engagement, also the communication skill.
Yeah, no, I would be interested in that too. So it's a question of again, I don't feel I can commit.
Right. That makes sense. Okay.
And I think of that, I think probably the law enforcement and the awareness and engagement are the 2 that I'm interested in.
Okay.
And you and Kim have been told. You know, are good
Yeah.
for the council.
Sounds good. Okay. Adnan and I agree, you know, it's important to get Kim involved in that conversation about awareness and engagement subcommittee and what she wants to work on. But I do feel like that awareness and engagement piece is really important. So
the other thing I might say is if Kim and Pat are both interested in that.
Pat is no longer on the
Oh,
committee.
Pat is no longer on the committee.
Okay. Well, does that more or less seem like we're settled into our places, except Adnan, you're a little bit of discernment, and we still have to hear from Kim and Johnny?
Yep.
Who's the seventh member of the committee?
Jonathan Clark. I don't know if you've met him yet.
Yeah, no, I have. Okay. But I didn't realize he was. I thought he was a real.
He's a member. Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously subcommittees can decide when they meet, but probably a good idea to potentially set up regular meeting time following our full committee meeting, so we make progress between meetings. Wonderful. Great. Well, here's to a good year. I mean,
Probably every subcommittee probably needs to have a head, so that the very three people on a subcommittee don't sit around all month waiting for somebody else to call them and call a committee.
Okay.
Subcommittee meeting.
Okay. Should we go through and identify those heads? Okay. On the housing subcommittee, Kristen, were you able to write these down?
Yes, I think so.
Fantastic. So on the housing, we have
It's Adnan and me, I think.
okay.
Oh, except if Adnan is on two other committees, that's a problem. Well, he hadn't decided yet. Yeah. Well, so far it's me, and I'll wait to hear from someone else if they're on that subcommittee. So I'll say that I'll be the head.
Okay.
So it's hard for me to find it someone else if there isn't someone.
Land acknowledgement, I'm gonna let Kim be the head, and I'm just gonna be her foot soldier. Conceal, we'll figure that one out too. Talk to Kim about it. Town policy, right now that's Andrew and Adnan. Just one if you want to take a lead on it. Thank you, Andrew. Law enforcement.
And
History of powerful humans.
so something you don't like to say and then not do it. Well, that's the hooker. It's easy to say you'll do it. The hard part is doing it well.
Hi. Okay, so any of the three of you want to take a lead there?
I don't want to, but I'm the logical one to do it, so I will.
Fantastic, thank you. And then we have a awareness and engagement, which is sort of a subcommittee. Yeah. Adnan, would you feel comfortable holding that one for now?
The awareness and engagement?
Yes.
Sure.
Kind of to see if it becomes a subcommittee, and if it does, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think we can do good work. I think we can move the needle. I think we can make a difference in our community. Great, thank you. So this relates to 4C, maybe the budget request cycle. Requests are due May 12th, which is just after our next meeting. So if you get together in your subcommittee and think, okay, this is our plan. We really want to do this. We're going to need these monies to do this project. I included last year's documents for budget requests in this agenda packet. Cindy wrote us the town financial head, just sent out this year's, so I can distribute that. But if
That's the one that I saw. I got the one. I got a blank. It was blank. It didn't have.
Oh, it doesn't have a year.
Well, no, it has a year, but it
Yeah,
doesn't
this
have
is
any
just
numbers.
it's just a reference point for folks to be able to know like what kind of information to put down there, and then we'll actually want to compile this to be able to.
I understand that. I thought you said that you had distributed last year.
No, not last. We didn't have an approved budget last year. It turns out. Yeah. Yeah, I think it never worked all the way through. So yeah, I just distributed this as a reference so that subcommittees can identify what information they need to provide. And then I'll send this request out again, but we're gonna want to get that together to compile it for a budget to approve as a committee next meeting. Okay, fantastic. Any questions on that?
So the deadline for the request is Monday, May 2nd.
The deadline for us submitting the information to the town is May 12th, but I believe we need to vote on it as a committee prior. So I will send out the information with that. You know, basically we'll want to have it in our agenda packet for the next meeting. So probably in the next 2 weeks would be, 2 to 3 weeks would be great to identify that.
So, and our next meeting is the 9th. May 9th.
Yes, correct. Yeah, so it's due to the town that Friday. Okay, any other committee member questions on this? Great, any members of the public? Okie dokie. Discuss new member applications to the committee. So we had Andy Brown last time, and I guess he's in Death Valley. I've been trying to confirm his continued interest. And now John Silver has also applied, not through official town channels yet. I think that might still help me, but
I can provide information about Andy if you'd like.
okay.
Andy and I
He
discussed.
spoke with us. He spoke with us at our last meeting.
Well,
Andy
good.
did, yeah.
But I also spoke with him back in December, and he said if I do it, he would, and I said so he's doing it.
Okay.
He's a little hard to get on the phone. You got to make sure he's not always good with voicemail. And you got to make sure
Yeah.
his hearing aid.
Yeah.
But
I think
he's sharp as a tack.
Yeah, Andy's wonderful. I think last time he had some questions about sort of like the Zoom and the meeting format. So I just wanted to check in and
I think
confirm
he's
his-
probably a lot better to actually be at the meeting given his hearing issues. But there might be a way of it.
Okay, well, I will check in with him and confer with the mayor. Yeah, so John's letter of interest was included in our agenda packet. And then John, would you like to share anything about your interest in this committee?
Well, I think mostly just if you have questions, except I don't have a working printer at home. I was just looking at my letter and with it. Anyway, it's a little hard to read on this screen, even when I blow it up. But it kind of reminded myself of some of the things I said, which, you know, I have a pretty good memory. But as I said in the letter, when I attended the county meeting for Portola Valley's first 501c PAC dedicated to raising $50,000 to defeat all incumbent council members. All their fire was aimed at Craig Hughes. Ultimately, $60,000, counting other candidates. Roughly, I'd have to look at the final Craig spent to defeat him. He spent under $2,000. The closest election in Portola Valley history, 39 days. In any case, having said all that, when one speaker said we've always been welcomed at outsiders in Portola Valley, the roll of my eyes. I didn't manage to get recognized. To correct the record there, hey, the N-word was common when I was in school. It was common. A lot of us had pushed back, but you had to be ready to push back. 1964, California voters voted 60-40 to repeal the Fair Housing Act. To once again, keep our neighborhoods safe, make it legal, once again, to discriminate against people based on race, religion, and nationality. Ronald Reagan, corporate spokesman, championed that. 2 years later, he was elected governor. I would love to know what the vote was in Portola Valley. I'd love to think we were an outlier and voted against it. I doubt that we were that wise. The courts later threw it out. A friend of mine who's a realtor here since passed away, who was the lone vote of the California Realtors Convention not to endorse Prop 14. And hey, these are bits of history that shouldn't be forgotten. Howard Lewis is one of my heroes. I've met probably a number of real heroes in my life. None of them will admit they were. They just did the decent thing. But to do the decent thing in an extraordinary time, that makes a hero. I loved our 1950th town anniversary. It was a great meeting in this room with Sam Halstead, who I met when I was in high school, as mayor then, and other town luminaries. It was great. And it was a great meeting. All feel good walking in. Ozzie in here, you know, nice stuff, but I'm sorry. The Vietnam War is gearing up. Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were brutally murdered in Mississippi. Not a match. John Ellis, who I believe still headed the journalism department at UC Berkeley, was a cinematographer at the Eisenhower Prize Series and won the MacArthur Genius Award after the first 6 episodes, which they had a terrible time raising money for. He had freedom singers come through Yale in 63 or the 63, 64 academic year. He volunteered to work for SNCC that summer. He sat down at the desk that had been vacated by the missing Mickey Shorter 2 weeks before. It took another 30 days for the FBI to find his brutalized body, along with James Goodman, who was welcomed to Mississippi his first day there. And the brutally beaten body of James Cheney, who couldn't go to New York at the end of Freedom Summer. He had to live there. He was Black. Why not remember that history too? You know, it just, I think, and that's part of the reason I think I said in my letter, I'd be interested in working in cultural arts. Let's have maybe concerts indoors where people actually listen to the words of the song when the weather isn't so good. I'm going to volunteer to serve on cultural arts too, because I mean, by the way, my ex and I produced a couple of sold-out concerts in Palo Alto with an Irish singer-songwriter who had worked in Northern Ireland for the civil rights and peace movement and got death threats for it. Extremists of neither side, like the people who were peaceniks.
So, John, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm watching the clock, I get where you're coming from. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your connection to history and the history of the town. I've grown up here and participated in the town government for a long time. Yeah, you have a lot to offer. And just so folks know, John and I did have a conversation earlier where we talked about his loquaciousness and how that would, you know, fit into committee meetings. Yeah, so, you know, that we've all got our things, but John has a lot to offer. Yeah. So I want to open to committee members if there are any questions for John or comments also about Andy.
I just had one question, John, when you first stood up. I thought you said something about you and Andy talked and said either he would do it or you
No,
would do it.
no,
But my
we have
understanding
both
is you
agreed
are
if he
both
would do it, I would.
and you
We
would.
made a pact,
Just
somewhat tongue in cheek.
wanted to
But
get that clear. Yeah. I have a very simple, as secretary, do you spell your name J-O-H-N or
no,
J-O-N?
J-O-N, which means I'm often confused for you, you know, like Mormon.
And I guess my other question is, you've heard the discussion of sort of where the committee is going. Where would you see yourself fitting into the committee?
Well, I'd want to review and think about the subcommittees a bit, but what as I think I said in my letter, I would like to work with, and I spoke with Nancy Gunn, town historian, about this, on restoring the Chilean woodchopper's house, which was like the house of the Underground Railroad. You allow it to fall down and be a sin. There were 16 little huts like that. It sheltered Chilean sailors who went to the gold fields, would have lost their lives to stay there. Maximo Martinez gave them work and housing, saved their lives. That needs to be commemorated. There's a wonderful cover story in the Atlantic in December about soapstones, stumbling stones, Germany. Might say Irene Rosenstiel, born 1902, blah, 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 blah. Arrested, reported such a date, deported, died, tells a lot in just a few lines. Now, the conquistadors and the early gringos didn't keep records like Nazis, unfortunately, but we can still do some things that are symbolic of that and not allow people to say it's all been hunky-dory when it wasn't. The worst thing you can do, besides oppress them, is to deny you've done it. Not always history more likely to repeat itself, but it just adds insult to injury.
Okay. Any other questions? Adnan, do you have any question or comment? Nicole?
I have a question. How many committees do you want to join?
Just do it.
Okay. I mean, you and I talked
I'm an
about
old,
this.
I'm
You
an,
mentioned a couple of others.
I don't mean to use off-color language, but I'm an old fart. I get tired. And by the way, I've got 6 hungry friends in my car.
Mhm.
And so I'm probably I normally won't leave committee meetings early, but I will tonight.
Okay, no problem.
I mean, after this.
Adnan, anything you want to add?
Just thank you for your contribution and your passion. Appreciate hearing from you, John.
Thank you.
The formal process is really between you and the mayor.
Mayor,
It used to be that the committees voted and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't happen anymore.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I would make the point that I think, as you said, you identified yourself as a placeholder until, you know, somebody else wanted to be on the committee. And I guess I do feel like some personal resistance to our committee becoming more white, I think, than it was initially. And losing a little bit of diversity. I mean, I've seen in town volunteers, it's like there's not a lot of diversity in town volunteers, and I don't think it's necessarily a reason to turn down good volunteers to our committee. But I guess I'm just speaking that. But I'm fine being a placeholder too, and I think, you know, the best thing we could do is like go out and try and do some good work and get people who would want to replace or, you know, add some diversity to this committee. Yeah. Okay. Any other committee members on this agenda topic? Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Any members of the public?
Good work.
Okay. So this was discuss committee structure update draft proposal. This is from Portola Valley Town Council. We have Councilmember Taylor here. There was a draft of this proposal in our agenda packet if folks got a chance to look at it. And this was council members, I think Taylor and Warnikoff particularly, just seeing if it made sense to simplify committee procedures to remove sort of cumbersome things like Brown Act, or also I think staff burden were two of the main goals. So we're supposed to discuss this and then bring our feedback to the committee of committees. I'm wondering if folks had a chance to read this or have any questions. Like, I think part of the question is, you know, would we want to continue as a formal committee, or there's options to be like a less formal. Fantastic.
I was at that committee. The proposal is currently all town committees are appointed by the town council and are subject to the Brown Act. And in the last year or so, we've all come up against the sort of more picayune, annoying, and limiting aspects of the Brown Act. You know, I mean, I can't vote because he's attending remotely, but because we didn't have his address in the agenda, he can't vote, stuff like that. So the question was, is there a way to get, obviously town committees doing official business would continue to be transparent, responsible to the public, open to the public, all of the, you know, could we find a way to have all the good parts of the Brown Act and not all of the ridiculous parts of the Brown Act, the limiting parts of the Brown Act, and streamline the works a bit.
So the proposal was that there might be, and this is all very draft, and one of the reasons they're coming to us is to ask for other suggestions or pieces of this you like or don't like. To have some committees continue to be regular Brown Act committees. You have another group of committees, that other line called non-Brown Act committees, I'll just call column B. They would be appointed not by the council, but by a subcommittee of the council. And those angels dancing on that particular legal pinhead would make them so they didn't have to be Brown Act committees. So the advantages to that would be that you could meet hybridly, for example. Now all the committees have to be in person. Most of us prefer to be in person, but you could do a hybrid and Adnan could come and he could vote. The public participation would be still part of it, but you wouldn't be held to this standard of absolutely every agenda item, remembering to ask for communication, that sort of thing. The noticing would be, you'd still have to notice, but it wouldn't have to be, if you left out a line, it wouldn't mean you couldn't have a meeting, that kind of thing. That's been a problem. Agenda would continue to be set as they are now by the committee, with the council liaison, etc. The minutes could be a little more what the committee wanted their minutes to be, as opposed to these action item limited. And
do you want to describe column C?
And column C was going to be even looser. The groups, this was the one that was a little less clear. It wasn't sure who might want to do this, but committees that don't meet that often or don't deal with many issues, or at which no member of the public has ever really come to, would be even looser, that they would be supported by the town, but they might not need appointing, for example. It might be that they would literally be a group. Their meetings could be the kind of meetings they want. They would still notice their meetings, etc. It would just be looser, and would be less likely to have as much staff devoted to them, that kind of thing. Yeah, so committees discussed this a little bit, and then it's coming back to us to do it.
And there are questions for us to consider if we want to read through them.
Right.
And if there's any questions right now, Craig Taylor is a relative expert in this.
Right, and
so.
Craig was very involved in creating this and drafting a lot of it.
Do any committee members have questions off the bat?
Is there any important piece of this I left out?
I just have a comment. Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I think there were at least twice that we weren't able to meet last year because of some of these issues with the Brown Act. So I just wanted to bring that up because, again, depending on, what was it, 11% of the adults in Portola Valley are volunteers in some of these committees. I think that was what it was, 400 out of 3,600 or so. So I think that there's some folks that are new to the Brown Act and that are still learning a lot of the different things, and it's very cumbersome. So yeah, so anyways, just wanted to put that as a comment. I'll stop there.
Okay.
What are the legalities of setting up committees that are non-Brown Act committees? And the only actions that this committee would foresee taking are actions of recommendations to council.
The town lawyer, it all was vetted and by her. I believe that they were just working out the proposal.
Yeah, I think what's happened is over time, we've gotten swept up into like all our committees are Brown Act committees. Even though, like you say, mostly what we expect is the committees to be involved citizens that make recommendations to staff or to the council for something, but they're not the final deciders. But that's not the way the Brown Act works. If the council appoints you, you are by definition subject to Brown Act rules. And the, you know, as the screws have slowly been turned to tighten up on this, if you meet, that's, you know, if you're not here, you need to have it on the agenda where you'll be. So you have to publish an address. You also have to have it be ADA compliant. So you have to be able to get there with a wheelchair. So, you know, the list of things that starts getting layered on gets to be pretty extreme. Also, if you don't have a quorum, you cannot meet. Like, you can't sit here and just say, we're not going to make any decisions or make any recommendations. We're just going to chat. As a group, you can't do that under the Brown Act because you don't have a quorum. So I think we're trying to find a place where we still want to make sure we have transparency. We still want to make sure that the public can, you know, that aren't members of the committee can be involved and follow what's going on within the committee structure. So it's not meant to be a free-for-all. But, you know, I personally think that, you know, if you ended up like tonight, if you had 3 people here and you were ready to have just have discussions, you weren't going to make recommendations, but you guys were all met and you were ready to talk about some stuff, that you should be able to do that and not be limited by the Brown Act. So those are the main things that we're just trying to provide more flexibility. We've also gotten people who are like, you know, I don't know my schedule. Like, I can get called on a business trip 2 days before a meeting. And so the agenda has already been published. They can't, you know, reschedule easily, and they can't be there. And then the meetings get canceled and everybody gets frustrated. So it really is the underlying goal here is to make it easier for people to volunteer.
Seems to make a lot of sense. Or people get sick.
Yeah. So in terms of our committee being able to contribute to the conversation, I'd love to just look at the first 3 questions really quickly. Does the alternative committee structure above seem like a step in the right direction? Feel free to popcorn out if you have a perspective on that.
I think this committee should be a Brown Act committee. I was on Nature and Science. There's no reason that put on a star party. They wouldn't let me do it because I was in the committee. But you know, if you're doing education and outreach, you don't need to. What we're doing will make hopefully impacting policy in some way. With a certain level of formality and public input. Brown Act is not that hard to follow. You can just have committee members who are committed, who understand it, and know that you can't miss more than 1 committee a year. So you screw everything up. As long as you know that, don't join a committee that you can't go to most of the meetings of. You know, it's not that hard. You don't have in you do it. I've sat on a lot of Brown Act committees for a year, so it's second nature a little bit. That's my thing.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, so let's combine questions 1 and 2. Does the general framework seem like a step in the direction? And for our committee, does it make sense to change to an alternative non-Brown Act body?
So I think number 1, it does seem like a step in the right direction. There are some smaller committees for whom it would make a lot more sense and make things less cumbersome, easier. Pretty open to changing. I think what Andrew said is interesting because it raises sort of a larger issue, and that is, well, we're an important committee doing important things, so we should stay a Brown Act committee. And I think one of the concerns that came up when we were talking about this in conservation was there was some concern that if we moved ourselves from being a Brown Act committee to being in column B, would that make us one of the quote less important committees? Would we have you know, less clout? Would we be, you know, would our budget not be as, you know, and from what I understand, the council is quite clear that's not the way they're looking at it. Appear to be part of the package, but there's real concerns about it. I don't know if that's it. I don't think that's a very realistic concern, but it's interesting. What's the criteria for who should and shouldn't do it? Clearly, people who are making decisions about anything, so who are, you know, are able to spend money themselves without the council being the money. Those people should.
If you wanted to have a committee that was more like, I think, what Ken maybe originally had in mind, and became frustrated with the Brown Act when she realized that she was the chairman of the Brown Act Committee. You know, that's fine. That doesn't even need to be part of the city government. You know, an educator group, you know, but that's a different kind of organization.
It's kind of the last one.
Right.
Right. So what I'm sort of gathering is you don't really want to be a group. You want to be more formal.
Yeah, and I couldn't imagine that guys being a group. I mean, we have a couple of committees in town that don't publish agendas, that do meet, and they're completely in violation of the Brown Act. And the thing is, the people who get in trouble for violations of Brown Act are the actual members. They're the people who are legally responsible. It's not the town. It's if a public citizen wants to sue them, they are liable. And this, you know, and will likely lose.
And not the town.
Not the town. But it's the committee members that violated the Brown Act. So that's I mean, it's just like conflict of interest and other things. It is on the individual that the blame sits. So I was just going to answer the one question. So I see between the two, I see no distinction in terms of access to council, budget issues. I mean, all the rest of the things that we normally do. Mm-hmm. I see that, you know, at least our intent here when we wrote this up was that there's no difference. It really truly is just to make sure that people have a little bit more flexibility. And to be clear, it's not every committee gets to just then go, oh, well, we're not Brown Act, so we can do whatever we want. Mm-hmm. Like that's not the goal. Is whatever we define for the non-Brown Act, we're still going to probably say 72-hour, you have to have your agenda in, it has to be posted. Because it's non-Brown Act, we might be able to do self-serve where the chair could actually put it up on the website. Whereas for Brown Act committee, we're not going to do that. It's always going to go through the clerk. Yeah. Because, you know, it's basically got legal consequences. So there are things like that I think we could do to sort of just simplify people's lives.
Yeah. What's the timeline on this, Fred, in terms of like when these changes happen?
You know, I mean, in theory, as soon as possible, but you know, this is public government, so as soon as possible. You know, if it were June, I'd be pretty happy. You know, to be honest. Yeah. You know, because I mean, the goal is to get people's feedback. And make sure if people are comfortable with it, then we can move ahead. And we can always try it as well. And then, you know, people say, you know, this is not working. I want to be a Brown Act. It's like nobody's going to stop. I mean, at least I can't imagine the council saying, oh, no, we're not going to do this. We're really trying to build in some more flexibility. So
would it make sense? Would it make sense to pilot it out? I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but to try it out with a committee or two and see what it feels like over the course of, say, 6 months?
I think we could. I mean, I'm open to it. I don't know exactly what we get for the pilot that we wouldn't get by just whichever committees want the flexibility to ask for it. Because I mean, I think the main thing I'm looking for in column 2 is the non-Brown Act committees need to abide by the same set of, and I'm putting this in air quotes, rules. They just might not be all Brown Act rules. But it can't be that every committee just gets to make up a different set of rules, because then the public will have no way of understanding what's going on. So if we do a pilot, the thing we'd have to be careful of is to make sure that the committees that we chose were at a broad enough representation so that the rules we adopted for the pilot were the ones that made sense.
I mean, I think it would give a better sense of the TBD on, you know, like the noticing and how it goes with like self-serve, those kinds of things. I think would be the things that could be the sticky points. But if those were kind of figured out by a smaller number of committees, rather than being like, all right, 9 of the committees are going to move over, and then all of a sudden there's like a whole nother issue that comes up that could have been solved by just creating better FAQs or something like that.
My guess is only a few committees are going to want to do this, and then if that goes well for them, others might shift over. That in a way it's its own pilot project in a way.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, and now I'm just speaking personally, because eventually this will get to the council for a full council hearing. But the goal is that, you know, committee gets to choose. If they want the flexibility, then they can choose that flexibility. And if they don't, then they can stay a Brown Act committee. I think the thing that's important though is that people understand what it means. And like Andrew clearly does, which is great. Other committees, I go to the committee meeting and it's like, this stuff is not legal. I mean, even like tonight, and I totally understand what happened, but you just can't meet and start these meetings and be out of compliance. So, and I think that's what our attorney was like, you have all these committees, and that's sort of one of the impetus for this is we have all these committees and they are violating, enough of them are violating the Brown Act that this is kind of an issue. Because the place it might blow back on the town is if a judge were to say, well, you, the town, and your attorney haven't been clear on exactly what people need to do, and you've let all these committees just wander off into weeds. So even though the individual committees would still be, responsible for their own behavior, the town could potentially be responsible for, I guess, a lax oversight at a larger level. So I don't know that. I'm not an attorney, so I want to be careful not to get too far into legal weeds here, and Andrew might be able to help me here. But that's sort of what we're after. And my goal by June would be to have defined whatever we think a non-Brown Act slot looks like and put the rules by it. And the committees that want to join under those rules, join under those rules. And if you don't want to join under those rules, then stay a Brown Act committee. It seems pretty simple to me in that sense.
Well, I have two questions.
Yeah.
One for you, which is, are non-Brown Act committees still eligible for town funds?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We fund nonprofits they aren't even committees.
Yeah. Okay,
So, yeah.
great. And then for committee members, it seems like one of the main advantages is the flexibility of being able to call in virtually to a meeting instead of needing to be in person. Would that be attractive enough would that be attractive to committee members?
There are times, I strongly feel that you have a much better meeting if you're all sitting at the same table.
Yeah.
It's more enjoyable. It's a little reward for doing the work, if you will.
Yeah.
It's just more collegial and informal. And you can say, well, what about in a way that if you're in a Zoom meeting, wait a minute. That, on the other hand, if I'm sick, or something makes it really hard to be here, and Joshua Tree, and you want to be a responsible committee member and attend, and so you can have a quorum so that you can have a meeting. It's enormously valuable to be able to Zoom in, and I can't do that from my house because I'm up a bunch of stairs, so it will never be accessible, so it would never work. Yeah. So I feel the one thing I want to say, and Craig said it a couple of times in terms of what he thinks should happen. I'd like it to come up from the committees too. But I feel very strongly that you need to have a really, really, really clear list of what the rules are for the non-Brown Act committees. That all these maybe even splitting into all of these pieces of Brown Act. You still must do the Brown Act requires this, these things that you do not need to do. And so it's crystal clear.
Yeah, I guess I'd be interested in knowing.
I don't think
I'd be interested in knowing what you can't do if you're not Brown. I don't want to go like, okay, well, we'll make it really easy for everyone to come in and Zoom. Because we'll avoid all these rules, and then these other rules, you can't do X, Y, and Z because you're Brown.
Yeah, and I don't know if there are, when we talked about this.
Yeah, so as far as I know, the only thing you can't do is we have some committees that are actually written into our code. So if you're written into the code, Conservation Committee being one of them, you have to be a Brown Act committee. So that'd be one thing you can't do is you can't be making decisions. You can't be written into the code. So that would be the piece that you really couldn't do.
Obviously, planning
well, that's a commission. Planning Commission and the architectural site, they're commissions. They're going to be Brown Act. They're never going to get a choice. Just like the council. I mean, we'll never get a choice. Like so this is literally just for our committees. The other thing that, I've told people, we've talked about, we have like 19, I guess 17 committees, and Los Angeles has like 9. So we have way more. And I think we've just, we've gotten sucked up into this thing that's really meant for a bigger set of decision makers. The other thing is our committees here are advisory to the council. I mean, you guys can vote on anything you want. The council will go, no, we don't like that. And that's the end of it. So, you know, I mean, not to be negative, but at the end of the day, the council appreciates all the input from the committees, but it's the council as a Brown Act body that's actually going to make a decision. And so that's, to me, that's why this works, because to me, there's still a Brown Act body in this chain. So if any real decision gets made, it gets made by a Brown Act body. So that, and without that, I wouldn't be for this at all. I mean, because I think that's critical that you have Brown Act in there someplace.
Adnan is raised his hand. Adnan?
Yeah, so just personally, I, you know, this meeting and then the last meeting that we were going to have that didn't happen because of quorum. I have to be virtual for that one and this one. And there'll probably be at least 2 to 3 more this year that I'll need to be virtual for. So if that is something that is not possible, then I won't be able to serve in this committee.
Okay, good input.
Now, when you speak about making decisions, one of the things we've talked about at various times is having some kind of community-wide presentation, educational presentation. Is that the sort of thing then that would have to be approved by council? Either now or, you know, under Brown Act or...
So help me understand, you're proposing having some community-wide discussion?
Community-wide discussion or educational presentation?
Yeah, I would expect that would go up, certainly at least up through the town manager and the liaison, at least that far, and possibly all the way to the full council. Yeah. Yeah, now the committees are not empowered to basically just go do things. It's just like, I mean, another problem we've had recently is committees have started creating their own Facebook pages and things like that. That's not, as Brown Act committees, that's not okay. So stuff like that. So yeah, but I don't think that changes the way it is now. Like that's already the reality. We have some flaws in the system where sometimes people don't quite understand, and then we just have to fix those. And, you know, generally I'm okay. That my problem with the Brown Act committee is, you know, the law is the law, whereas I tend to believe most complicated human systems, you have about a 10% error rate, and you sort of accept it and you just sort of fix it. But when you're breaking the law, then that 10% could, I'm not saying it would, but could be consequential.
I'm just thinking of a scenario, let's say we come up with some brilliant plan for the town council adopt it. Somebody doesn't like it. Where did this come from? It came from a non-Brown Act committee rubber stamped by the town council. I could see where that would still be a problem.
Well, the only difference is, for my vote, you'll never get a rubber stamp. Right? I mean, you can make a recommendation. You can explain to me why you guys think this is a good idea, and I will look at it independently, and then I'm going to decide. Like, it would never, like for me, the seal would never go through, like, say, consent agenda, where the consent agenda is sort of a, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, it doesn't need to be looked at, just move on.
Well, I'm not saying that.
Important pieces of our process will be exactly discussion people can say.
Andrew, is the concern just that we would be regarded as having less credibility as a
No, there would be
His perception.
Perception that there was an end run. The town didn't want public scrutiny. They set up a bunch of committees to write the actual laws, and then it passed it.
Yeah.
And that's how it would be portrayed by the people who didn't like it.
Yeah.
I had to hear for months how there was no public input on housing element. And I listened to 6 hours of public input of it. Yeah, people don't like results. They always say.
Yeah, so I guess my sense is that if you publish your agenda and you publish your minutes, then yeah, I mean, people can always say they perceive this as injustice, but if you're looking for injustice, you know, then you're going to find it because you're looking for it. So, but that's sort of, I mean, that's why we asked all the individual committees to discuss this, because this is part of the conversation. I mean, if you guys think that the perception is still an issue, even if in fact it's not, perception is still a powerful thing. And I don't want to discount that. So I totally appreciate your comment. So I think that's what we're trying to balance here. We're trying to balance that, you know, potential perception versus some flexibility to make sure that our volunteers are more capable of participating. Because to listen to Anand, I mean, if you look at our county, our committee handbook right now, you're supposed to miss like 2 meetings a year. And if you miss more than that, then you shouldn't be on the committee. And that's, you know, unfortunately, we don't enforce that because that's not Brown Act. That's just our committee handbook. So that we're a little more flexible about that. But one of the issues I always have is, and this is back to kind of perception, which is whatever set of rules you have, you ought to hone pretty close to them. Because as soon as you start making exceptions, then people go, well, in this example, you let this slide, but over here, you were, you know, total, you know, letter of the law. And like, to me, that's the thing I find very unfair when it's applied unequally.
I would think that if people were traveling, I just issued for a meeting, if I just said I'll be at such and such an address, that's all I really needed to do, right?
I don't know.
At this point.
Well, yeah, but it needs to, you need to say it. I mean, what's gotten more complicated, as I understand it, is it needs to be in your agenda, on the agenda itself. So it can't be like the day before you call the chair up and say, oh, by the way, I'm not going to be there. It needs to be the Friday before or the Wednesday before. Well, but let's be clear.
It was during COVID.
But this is during COVID. COVID, there were special exceptions. So COVID, you were allowed to have remote meeting, and you didn't have the ADA rules and all the rest of this. We're not, as of April 1st, or maybe even March 1st, I guess it was March 1st, the rules changed. Like that special declaration, you know, the governor's thing stopped happening. So that it's a different place now than we were before.
People go like, I'm at such and such a hotel in Boston,
right?
Knock on my room.
Well, you have to put a sign on the door. Yeah. So the rules are, you have to, it's supposed to be in the agenda. You have to put a sign on the door, and it has to be ADA accessible.
Yeah, it's
right.
cumbersome.
Which
Okay,
hotels often work, right? But private residents often don't.
So I'd like to wrap this meeting up. I apologize that we went late as usual. Craig, thanks for
absolutely. Sorry,
trying to make it happen. No, you're right. It is a wild reality in Portola Valley with all this stuff. So it's a good idea. I think we can revisit this. We'll have a month for folks to think about it. And the next committee meetings where this will be discussed will be after our next committee. She sent out
but it's like it's going to be like May 18th,
May 18th or 23rd. So that's after our next meeting. So we can check in about this at our next meeting. If that's what we do.
And the decision about whether or not we want to be, at this point, we're just giving our input to the council, to the committee that's looking at this. And if the council decides to do it, then we will have a decision as to whether or not we choose to do it.
I think that's what we're going to figure out as we go. I mean, because this committees is basically, it's just all the chairs or their designate to basically come talk about it. Because what I'm hoping to get out of all the committees is, what do you think all the advantages are? What do you think the disadvantages are? Anders brought up a bunch of good points tonight. So those are the ones, like, what can't we do if we're non-Brown Act? Like, I think it's important that we articulate that. So that's the purpose of this right now, is to get that to the next step. And then, I think that as far as I'm concerned, again, I need to be careful because I'm speaking as an individual council member, not as the council. I would leave it up to every committee. I could imagine that the council could say, no, we're going to decide which committees are Brown and non-Brown Act. They could do that. I wouldn't recommend it, but they could. So I want to be careful that I'm only speaking on my, my personal opinion. But I can't imagine that the councils going to dramatically change. I mean, if you're already Brown Act and you want to stay Brown Act, I think they pretty much say okay. So anyway, let me not drag this out. Thank you, Lucy. I
Okay,
appreciate
yeah,
the
no,
time
thank
you
you.
gave us.
Thanks for your service on the council. Okay, there is one more agenda item, which is 5A, old business update on land acknowledgement and discussion. And we don't really have time for this, and we definitely don't need 15 minutes for it. But basically, I've had some conversations with Craig about it, and similar to last time, there's council interest in us sort of talking to more committee members and coming up with something, or more committees and coming up with something more nuanced. So I'm still engaged in those conversations, and I'm going to come back next meeting with a proposal for our committee to approve, to share with the council.
And have you started talking with other like committee chairs to get kind of their input?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because this is where I was thinking, like the logo. I also think if we had like 3 or 4 land use committee acknowledgements that we could then go and talk to each and say, well, these are the different ones we're looking at. Why does this one work or not work for you? And try to get that sense. Because for me, again, as a council member, the only thing I would say here is my concern is our current one is on the harsher side of all the ones I've read. I did go and read a bunch of them, and that I've had volunteers come back and say, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm on a committee and this is being foisted on me. And so we've kind of created this odd tension in a town where we honor our volunteers. So that's sort of my driving interest in trying to find something that doesn't just negate it and let's give up on it, but find a place that maybe is a little bit softer than what we have now. So, but you guys will work that out.
It never occurred to us that it would be such an issue. Just because what we're doing is going to push more people's buttons than the Constitution Committee is going to do. Just going forward, always include sort of a little round robin with some of the most important or related committees to get some feedback before we have a product to go out with. And the other was that along the lines of here are 3 versions, you might think about the various things we'd like to include, like here are 19 bullets, and most towns have 10 of them, which are the 10 that appeal to you, and which one design your everybody can sort of do a design, some consensus from that to the council or versions of that. And the other is that I found that all the people who came to me complaining about it were the thing they were really the burr under their saddle was from the extreme of saying, oh, I'm on the committee and now I could get sued because that's on an agenda. I'm going to have to give my land, my property back to the Indians. Paranoia. Yeah. Yeah. That's the word.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to hear a diversity of opinions from different committees, and I will come back with a succinct report for next meeting so that we can progress with the council.
I think to your point is, I think when you guys make recommendations, you might also add what your goal is. Because I mean, some of these goals, the goal is to cause a discussion, right? To actually get a discussion. And then maybe you want
Craig, I'm going to also say that this was already approved also by the council in October. So there's a whole nother conversation to be had about what happens when 3 new members of a council are appointed? Do they have to go through every single decision that was made the year before by the former council to go back and say, hey, this doesn't sit well with us, right? So there's a whole nother conversation here. So I think that at this point, we need to wrap up this meeting and move on. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I'm bringing this up because I've heard from a lot of committee members. So I think, and Judith said it, what I think didn't happen here is this was not circulated among the committees. This kind of went up to the council and then got pushed down to the committees. So it's a bad process. And so that's another discussion for another day as well.
I think Adnan's point is is legitimate, that when there's a new majority on council, there's dynamics there that are worth looking at. Yeah,
But I don't think this came from the new council. I think it came from, you know.
indeed, it just
committees.
happened. I mean, I think
It was
there's
pushed back to the council.
there's multiple
Yeah.
factors all happening at the same time that are all valid.
This is not a platform I ran.
Can I get a motion for adjournment? A second? Second. All in favor of adjournment? Aye.
Well, nice to meet you guys. Mary will be back next month.
Thanks, Craig.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Adnan.
Thank you.
6:30. Yes.
Because someone thought it was 7 last night.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Okay. Yeah.